have much of a sense that Scotland really is anything different. And both sides, I suppose, can afford to be a bit discombobulated, in your phrase, about the independence debate.
See, I feel bad now because I actually do say "cheery by the new" when I've been talking to my parents on the phone.
God, you're such a savior. That's terrible.
I didn't even notice I did it until it was at work many years ago, and a workmate of mine noticed it and said, "My God, did you really say that? That's adorable!" So I nutted him.
But it's true though. I mean, like when I lived in Oxford, it's funny how the Scottish content of your vocabulary is kind of often not very obvious to you, as opposed to sort of standard English as you speak across the rest of the UK. As you find these words that you use, and people look at you blankly and think, "So what's that all about?" And you realise that it's these wee Scotticisms which are just quietly in your head and which pop out no matter how many years you've been in Bath or whatever.
Yeah, it's just like I've worked it down in Cambridge occasionally as well. And just little things, just like that. That one always used to make people laugh. I mean, because they don't really.
Sometimes there's no literal English translation that doesn't take loads of words to convey what in Scots is so easily like wersh or loughton or gowpin or coopin. You know, these things have a whole meaning all of their own that is difficult to explain.
Yeah, my favourite is swithering. I'm particularly keen on the word swithering, which I don't think the English use. But being an arch switherer in all things myself, I think it's particularly useful.
I quite like shouting "Stop havering" at people.
Oh, havering is another good one. Yes, absolutely. No, it's funny. It's I love these little characterful words, and as you say, they sometimes capture that thought, which just nothing in English will really do.
Okay, so we were talked about comedy a little bit. Before. So the comedy capers of Johann Lamont, again, is where we should come in, because I noticed she got quite another bad doing at First Minister's questions, but the cast had slightly changed. Did you see this performance? I'll go to Natalie first. Did you see?
I only read about it via the medium of Twitter because I was working like quite a few people, but you're saying comedy. I don't really think it's very funny. You know, we have this person that is getting paid as the leader of the opposition. And I'm sure, you know, she redistributes the wealth to Paul Sinclair quite well. But, you know...
Low blow, Natalie.
Well, you know, if you look at the dichotomy coming from the Labour Party, since Johanne's become increasingly isolated with Sinclair, apparently as her confidant, increasingly isolationist, it's aggressive, it's confused when it's there at all. And good governance deserves a strong opposition. And we don't have that here. And, you know, I am an SNP supporter, voter, member, but, you know, I think governments need to be held to account, and her account is so laughable.
Stu, I know you're a Joe La fan, so how do you feel about her performance in the job so far?
I mean, I'm very much with Natalie. I would like to be more amused by it, but whenever I watch her, I just get angry. I caught up with any questions last night. I was a bit behind on it. And I find myself just sitting there sort of swearing at the radio at the way she will just so blatantly say things that are lies. There is no other way of describing them. Smarter politicians, more competent politicians will insinuate things and they'll imply things, but Johann doesn't seem to have the wit to do that, so she will just come out and lie. She will just come out and say, "Oh yes, because of Article 346, we would have to put the UK would have to put the Type 26s out to tender," when Article 346 says absolutely no such thing. And she does it all the time. She will stand up in the chamber and be allowed to get away with telling lies. I don't think you should be able to do that. I think if it can be proved sort of empirically and categorically that you've said something in the chamber that's untrue, the first thing you should have to do the next week is stand up and say, "Oh yeah, sorry, that was cobblers." I mean, the First Minister seems to have to do it. He'll come back and make a statement if he's got a fact wrong. I think that should apply to everybody.
Andrew?
Yeah, just to approach it from a slightly different angle, I think it's been really interesting to see what's been happening to the Labour Party, particularly from a Hollywood perspective, over the past few weeks. Obviously, they won the Dunfermline by-election, as we discussed a couple of weeks back, and won it not not stupendously well, but well enough to avoid problems. But then suddenly Joanne's engulfed in this terrible press, and one of the reasons why she's been engulfed in the terrible press is that in order to win Dunfermline, which they were likely to win anyway, they've totally blown the bottom out of the only policy boat that was on the go, which was the sort of something for nothing speech, the critique of universal services, a sort of maybe a lefty critique of universalism. That's, I think, what Johann was aiming for. Where does Labour stand now on all of these policy issues? It reminds me an awful lot of what happened before 2011, and this wasn't very well noticed at the time, but when Ian Gray was the leader of the party, he appointed Margaret Curran to be a policy czar. Margaret Curran then left and got elected in Glasgow East as an MP, left the position of a policy czar. This really attracted almost no comment at the time, but I noticed it because you're thinking, well, if she's the woman who was leading Labour's movement towards achieving a coherent policy platform, and she's buggered off and hasn't been replaced by anyone, then where's the coherent policy platform going to come from? I think Johann Lamont's speech about the sort of something for nothing society or culture or country, I think, to give her exact phrase, was the emergence, however unattractive some of us might find it, of a coherent policy position. And now that's gone heave-ho. We know what happened in 2011. Faced with the approaching election against the SNP, the Labour Party said, we're going to do the same as the SNP or slightly less, but you'll have a Labour government, and we all know that's what the Scottish people want. It wasn't what the Scottish people wanted. So I think actually Dunfermline and the strategy that Labour's taken to its policy in Dunfermline is hugely significant in terms of the next few years, because it may signal something, quite a similar story policy-wise to what happened before the 2011 Holyrood election.
I suspect the reason Margaret Curran hasn't been replaced as their policies are is that their policy now is clearly whatever Ed Miliband says it is.
This has caused difficulty for Lamont before because she's come out with something and then it's been contradicted by London and she's had to backtrack or deny she said it, and this has happened a few times as well, which ties in with what Andrew's saying about the lack of coherence in their policy direction.
True. I think Andrew's made some really good points there. If you're a Scottish electorate looking at what political parties you want to vote for, why would you choose a derivative version of SNP policy when you can have the SNP who have created the policy and have shown that they can implement the policy? There needs to be some difference between instead of going for a kind of SNP-like Labour Party who are obstructionists for obstructionists' sake. The public kind of recognise that, and we have quite a sophisticated electorate in Scotland. I think maybe because we have so many different forms of election over time, and we have very, very different voting trends from local council elections to European elections via the Scottish Parliament and Westminster, and the electorate are quite comfortable with doing that, so they're quite aware of when they're being conned, I suppose.
Sure.
I think you have to be fair to Labour in one respect, which is that they're not hiding any of this stuff. I mean, it's hard to misinterpret One Nation. And the stuff that was Andrew Burnham came out with about the NHS, saying it's about time we stopped having different policies for the NHS in different parts of the country. They've been pretty much open about it. This is one of the things that I find particularly irritating or interesting, depending on how you look at it in my job, is that so much of what Labour say, they're actually saying it out in the open. There's the One Nation stuff, there's the Scottish policy will no longer be allowed to be different, and particularly also the stuff that they're saying about Barnet. I mean, they've come right out and said, basically, in not so many words, if Scotland votes no, we will be stopping Barnet, we will be redistributing money from richer parts of the UK to poorer parts of the UK, and we all know that Scotland is one of the richer parts of the UK. So they've come out and said, vote no and we will send more of your money to England, but none of the press either is smart enough to pick up on it or wants to publicise the fact.
Was that... Sorry, correct if I'm wrong, Stuart. Was that not Margaret Curran actually came up with some of the narrative around the Barnet formula?
She did it most recently. The first person that I saw laying out all that's the stuff about the pooling and redistributing of wealth was Gordon Brown when they launched United with Labour. He was the one who came out and said that, and he subsequently said that he wants that somehow put into legislation as well.
He's also subsequently disappeared. But Andrew, did you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean that's obviously a difficult one, and it has important connections. The whole Barnett and Barnett consequentials argument has a question about taxation. If Scotland gets more taxation powers, then obviously that would have implications for Barnett, because you wouldn't use a block grant system in general terms if you had a local tax raising power. So it's a kind of complicated picture, and I think Margaret Curran, as you were saying, Natalie, was accusing, was it Eck, the Maximum Eck, of wanting to end Barnett as if it was a bad thing, to which Adam Tompkins pointed out, I think, to her on the land of Twitter, that she wants to do so too. So I don't know what kind of allegation that is. There's also another aspect to this which is a bit more flippant and childish, but no less important. I don't know if any of you saw Lord Ashcroft's recent large-scale polling about the Conservative futures in the country, and he showed pictures of various public figures, including Johann Lamont, to his respondents, to which one of them responded, "Isn't that wee Labour woman, what's her name, Rosanna Cunningham?" She was mistaken for a junior justice minister in the SNP government. Not really a very good start. That she's not yet sort of achieved a sort of visibility against I think either Nicola or Salmond, which would make the kind of alternative governance argument sensible. If you're going to say you're going to do the same as the SNP, then you have to, as you were saying, Natalie, come up with something else. And it could be that you were just a more attractive leadership contender, that you'll do the same, but you'll do so more in a language and in a style that we'd approve of. I just don't think that Joanne is, with the best will in the world, and I have a soft spot for her in some respects. I just don't think that she's able to make that argument convincingly.
Okay, I think that could move us on to our next topic, which is sorry, this is going to be a harsh segue, but it's our show. We can be as harsh as we want. So our next topic is a little bit more cerebral than Johann Lamont. And Andrew, I believe you're going to be giving some lectures in the university about the constitutional position of independent Scotland. What kind of constitution should we have? Should we have a pared down constitution, or one with lots of economic and social rights put into it? So would you like to explain what you're going to be talking about a little bit?
Yeah, well, happily it's only one lecture, which I'm sure everyone would be pleased about, a one paper, which is at this what's called the Scottish Constitutional Futures Forum, which is a group set up by all of the leading public lawyers in Scotland to look at constitutional options for an independent Scotland on one hand, but also if we have a no vote. So to try and really make the best of all that kind of academic know-how and thought that already exists about how constitutions could and should be arranged. So the thing on Wednesday is at Strathclyde, and it's assuming a yes vote and asking, well, what kind of constitution should we have? As you say, you've mentioned many of the big ticket items about, should we have social and economic rights in there, or just civil and political rights? So by that I would mean, should we have a right to a home, say, or a right to education enshrined in the constitution, and should that be judicially enforceable? Should I be able to take the government to court if I don't get that? Those kind of questions. I'm playing a sort of Captain Hook figure, I suppose, and arguing that we should have a more political than a less judicial constitution, a shorter constitution that tries to enshrine fewer things, because I believe, I suppose, that rights and detailed policy ideas such as free higher education really don't have a place in constitutional documents, which are difficult to amend and which are going to be relied on in court. I'd rather see us using political checks and balances to hold the government to account and to uphold policies like free higher education. So I'll be arguing for a short constitution, but other people will be arguing for a larger one. But these are important issues, I think, for us all to kind of try and think about and try and generate that constitutional imagination across Scotland, as well as in these kind of slightly narrower public academic spheres as well. So that's the broad shape of it, Michael.
So Natalie, what kind of constitution would you like to see?
I tend to agree with Andrew on this one. I know that the constitution is something that gets people quite excited when they talk about what Scotland will look like, and it's one of the things that maybe inspires people the most, because they think about it in terms of policy. Because I think some of the things that Andrew's mentioned that people would want to put in there, like protection for higher education. I think they're kind of policy decisions, and I would be very careful about putting in the kind of transient policy positions of the period into a document which must stand at least a degree of test of time. I mean, if you look at some constitutions, the Irish, for example, I think their constitution was written in 1937.